Welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Marilyn Brown.
And I'm Jayme Wojciechowski.
And today I am very excited because we are back and we are discussing a topic that is very near and dear to my heart and exciting that there's a show about it. So we're discussing the new Starz documentary that it premiered about 5 weeks ago called America to Me. And the reason I'm so excited about this show is because I actually went to Oak Park River Forest High School, and funnily enough, like 5 minutes before we taped this, I found my gym shirt. I was looking for my graduation shirt and I couldn't find it, but I found my gym shirt, and so I had to put it on and represent because I graduated from Oak Park in class of 99. I'm kind of dating myself. I also found my mug, so I'm so excited about this show. It's really funny because everybody that I went to the school with and people that I know in the Oak Park community are all just kind of, our minds are blown that we're watching our high school and our community on TV. And so the exciting thing about the show, so it's a docuseries by Stephen James. And the show, it's a 10-episode docuseries, and it follows students at a high school in Oak Park River Forest. It's a suburb just west of Chicago. Oak Park has been one of the towns that's kind of known to be one of the first places to be diverse, to be racially diverse, to become integrated. We can talk about that a little bit later, but so the show and the high school and kind of the town itself are known as being a very diverse place where people are able to kind of coexist in this model of diversity, and so it's interesting because the show is really taking a different look at that, and so I want to kind of talk to you about that. And it really it follows students and talks about issues around race and also a very significant achievement gap that exists between white students and Black students in Oak Park. And so I wanted to just check in with you and see, have you watched the episode? How far have you gotten into the show? And kind of tell me what you think so far.
So I've watched the first 2 episodes so far. I have to subscribe to Starz to watch the rest, that's where it's on. It's on Starz. And it's been interesting because I watched it a couple weeks ago, the first episode, and I just wanted to kind of let it sit to see if I formed any kind of opinions about it. But I really haven't. And I think that's mostly because my experience was not in a diverse school at all. 99.89% of the students were white. I remember there being one Black family that I recall and one Asian family from China where the kids spoke very little English, so no one really people were nice to them, but they weren't in anyone's kind of friend group because they kind of stuck to themselves. So it's just been interesting to kind of watch the experience of these kids and observe it without having kind of any reference point for it.
Yeah, interesting. And so for me, it's been a completely different experience, and I can't really relate because, again, I grew up in Oak Park. I grew up in a community where there were white students and Black students in all of my classes for the most part, and yet one of the most interesting things about Oak Park is that there are though you're together, there still exists these two worlds. And that's really a lot of what the show is kind of highlighting, is that there really is very little actual coexistence between races, that everybody's pretty divided into different groups. And that's just kind of how Oak Park has often functioned. And I think that it's interesting watching it for me because that's one of the things that when I went into Oak Park and the high school especially, for me, my family is diverse. I have my grandmother was a white woman who adopted my mother, and so I've always had a diverse family. And so for me, growing up in Oak Park, I always thought, okay, like, this is school. I can be somewhere where I can be friends with whoever I'm comfortable with and whoever I connect with and not be judged for it. And yet that really wasn't the experience in Oak Park, and there really was a very, very kind of expected role that I felt that I was expected or pushed into being a Black person in Oak Park. and that came from everybody. It wasn't like, only Black people were expecting me to be a certain way, or that I felt that it was pressure from all sides. And I think that there was a kind of an expectation and a what's the word I'm looking for? I can't find it right now, but like just where you kind of feel like you're pushed into a box and not really allowed to be yourself, and really allowed to develop into yourself. And so that's kind of one of the things that for me was really striking about Oak Park. I actually was on the cheerleading team, and they show the cheerleading team in one of the first 2 episodes, and that is an interesting dynamic to me as well. And one of the things, again, that's persisted since, I went to that school and graduated almost 20 years ago, and even before that, that the cheerleading team is predominantly Black girls, and the drill team that does like the dance, and now they have like a band. They didn't have a band when I went there. We did not have a band. I watched the episode with the band, and I was like, wow, this looks so exciting. Like, what the heck? Their homecoming actually looks fun. One year, another school brought their band and like shamed us. So like, it was so embarrassing, because like another school brought their band, and like we had nothing to our homecoming. It was bad. I think that's why they probably added a band. Anyway, so drill team does like flags and things like that, but that's always been predominantly white girls, and maybe a couple of black girls on drill team, and same thing with cheerleading, like pretty much mostly Black girls, maybe a couple of white girls usually. And it's just always been like that. And I remember when I got there, I felt like I didn't really have a choice of which to pursue, and I'm somebody that I like to dance. I hadn't ever done cheerleading before. I wasn't really familiar with like doing stunts and things like that, but I was like, okay, this looks cool. But I didn't really feel like I had an option to join drill team unless I wanted to be then seen as like put in a box and seen as like, okay, now you're like that Black girl who like doesn't mix with Black, like isn't around Black people, you know what I mean? And so it was like there was kind of this like it was an interesting dynamic. And so it's interesting to me that still persists. And I wonder, are there people that felt like I did, like, okay, well, I could have been interested in this, but I felt like I wasn't even really allowed to over the now 20 years since it's, and beyond, probably 30, 40 years since it's been that way. And so that was interesting to me. But the one thing that I really was kind of another thing about the episode, they showed the cheerleading team, and this is something I want to kind of check in with you about, is that there were a lot of the teachers or the coaches in the school that really seem to feel very strongly that when they are interacting with Black students, working with Black students, that they have to treat them differently, that they have to be more aggressive. I think the cheerleading coach said something like, I have like all Black girls, and these girls are like tough, or so I can't remember her wording exactly, so like please don't quote me, but it was something to the effect of, I recognize, because this team is mostly Black girls, that I have to treat them more aggressively. And that really made me uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable. I feel that dynamic, but for her to really feel comfortable saying it, and saying it as if it was a statement of fact, and if there was no kind of nuance to that conversation, just really kind of blew my mind. And I was like, whoa, okay, so this is different, because it wasn't, when I was on the cheerleading team, our coaches, both coaches that I had were Black women, so it wasn't that kind of dynamic. So it was interesting to me, and I'm wondering, did you notice that?
I noticed it very blatantly. I actually wanted to ask you about it, because the other thing that I think it's just hard with documentaries, right? Because they're all edited, and in that sequence, I saw that it was being edited. There were cuts. So I was like, well, is that actually what she said in a row, or did they just put like these highlights together, and that's what it sounded like there? Like, I wasn't quite sure, because that section was highly edited. So I was really interested to see if you had experience with that, because they kind of, I think it was it was either the first or the second episode, because I definitely saw it, where there were like a string of little interviews that were kind of making it seem very much that way. What kind of struck me the most, specifically with the cheerleader thing, is that it seems like everyone is aware at that school, teacher-wise, that there's major issues with how it functions and with kind of equity within the diversity, and yet they seemed at the same time completely oblivious to certain aspects. There was a teacher who was asked about the drill team being placed like right in front of the biggest part of the stadium, and then the cheerleaders kind of being put off to the side, and she was like, yeah, I mean, I guess the middle just fills up first, and I don't even know who sits by the cheerleaders. And then they show a picture of one of the rallies, and it's all the black students by the cheerleaders. So the fact that there was a lack of awareness that I think, I mean, it's similar to kind of what the country's going through, right? There's the difference between the blatant racism and the kind of institutionalized subtleties that result from it. And it's like, well, we're not saying you have to be over here because you're black. It probably just happened naturally because of the racial tensions and the way the school functioned. But now it's just so part of it that people don't even think like, well, is this right, or why is it like this?
Yeah, so two things. So the first thing that really kind of that I noticed is that with the cheerleading coach and what she said and how she was talking to them and her demeanor, her attitude, like everything. I don't know. I just feel like she has watched way too many of those like
Bring it
TV,
on.
those like TV shows. You know what I'm talking about? Like the coaching, cheerleading coach nightmare shows or whatever. Because I felt like she was putting on a role. Like she was like, this is my moment. Mm-hmm. Either way, like it was a lot. But it's interesting to me that you felt like I want to see more. Like I like you wanted to for it not to be that blatant. I'm not saying it didn't want it that way, but it was just interesting. You were kind of like, okay, well, I just want to see more. Whereas for me, I was like, yeah, this is pretty blatant. Like it wasn't even just what she said in the cut piece, but also just how she was acting towards them that really made me extremely uncomfortable and made me feel like, this is not necessary. You know what I mean?
I think I picked up on what you're talking about, though, is she seems, in comparison to everyone else, she seems such a character that I was like, are you just putting it on because there's a camera there and you want your moment? Because even in the contrast of her, she just took the cheerleading so seriously, and everyone else was kind of like, we love it and we do it for fun because we want to do it, and she's like the drill sergeant. Mm-hmm. Like it just something didn't seem right.
I know. All.
Like it was just.
Yeah, no, I definitely could see that. But it was also, so the other thing I completely forgot about this part, and I'm glad that you pointed it out. The where they actually get to cheer, and that the drill team is like dancing in the front of the game or in the front of the stands, and then the cheerleaders are kind of all the way off to the side. So that part really struck me as well, because that was also not a part of my experience. So when we were there, the cheerleading team was like popping. Like we were winning competitions, we were doing extremely well. We also again didn't have a band, and so like there wasn't really a lot that drill team actually did when I went there. Not saying they didn't do anything, but they came out at halftime and they did their routines at halftime, and then did a couple of things during the show, but they weren't like on the field dancing. So that part was different as well, and that really kind of struck me as kind of like, well, what happened? Like how did that shift? And I was just kind of
That's interesting, yeah.
Really, I was really just kind of curious of like what happened. And I mean, again, it's been like 20 years. So like a lot can shift in 20 years. But I do think that that also just felt very like a much more extreme and much more overtly racist experience for the students. And I wonder if things have gotten, again, things were always pretty segregated at Oak Park. I mean, there weren't, not saying there were people that didn't hang out with everybody. A lot of times the athletes and sports teams and stuff, there was a lot more people connecting and hanging out with each other. But I feel like it seems like there's been an even more kind of increase in the space between races at Oak Park and at the school. Another thing, like this is in a later episode, but I just noticed that like they're much more on top of security. Like when students are coming in, like I don't remember them checking our IDs when we came into the school really regularly and like stopping you. And it just seems like a much more tense atmosphere overall. So that was interesting to me. Definitely.
Yeah, I think, again, even with going back to the cheerleading coach, the thing I noticed is that was similar with her and pretty much every other teacher or administrator that we saw was I think and I already talked about it a little bit, that difference between the having those subtle racist qualities that are just part of our culture because everyone's taught them, versus actually trying to be aware of it and fix the problem, because she made the thing about like, oh, I have to be harder because they're black girls, but then and I could be remember this wrong, she was also the one who was trying to get them to rotate positions with the drill team and mentioned, I think that the whole racism element with that she brought up. So I saw that with a lot of the teachers, this like they're wanting to kind of do the right thing and like fix the problems, but also being part of the problem. And I think it's hard because and I hope they kind of dive into this as the series goes, because it starts with the reason they decided to do the documentaries, because when Black Lives Matter happened, they tried to do the administration wanted to have a Black Lives Matter rally with just black students, and there was mass outrage that the white students would be excluded. And I think what's hard is, I mean, you look at that school, and yes, there's a couple black teachers, but it's very clear that the vast majority of the administration is white. And I think it's hard for white people to fix the problem without having the insight from the black experience, right? Because it's not something you've experienced, so you're just going off of your own biases and what you think without having any understanding. Right. And it seems like the school is also kind of conflicted on how it wants to do that, because having just I hope it goes into the debate about the rally a little bit more, because I think it's kind of an important one, because I understand the points of kind of both sides of the argument, even though I strongly lean towards the usefulness of having those kind of rallies. It's the same as Black Lives Matter. If you go to a rally, yeah, there's a couple or events, not really the rallies, but if you go to a panel or anything that they're holding, a lot of them are no media and no white people. And it's to create a safe place so that people can discuss the issues without feeling hesitant or feeling scared or feeling like they can't say things. And then later, once you have that space and the dialogues there, then you can bring in kind of the allies to discuss things. But it's kind of stages in doing it. And if they would have done the rally and had a bunch of the white students there, I'm sure it would have been non-productive, because it would have been like everything else we were seeing in the documentary.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I do hope that they go more into that and kind of maybe, I'm thinking maybe because that was kind of the first issue that was brought up, maybe that'll be like the bookend kind of talking about it. I hope that they bring that back up, but I do agree with that, and I think that it is important to be able to create that safety. And going back to what you were saying about the white teachers and their awareness of the issue, and that's something that has been persistent throughout OPRF as well. And so this problem has been going on and maybe steadily getting worse over the last few decades, but it's really interesting. I'm sorry if you guys can hear a lot of background noise, but like there's somebody working on my door. I don't know. Timing is fantastic. But we're just going to roll with it. But it's been a consistent problem, and such that I remember when I arrived at Oak Park in 1995, I was immediately placed into a program that I didn't even know what it was. It was called 4 by 100. And what it was there were 4 teachers. So they took the 4 core class teachers, math, science, English, history for like freshman year, and 100 students that they had pre-identified as at risk for not doing well academically. The interesting thing, I still have no idea. I want to like research this and figure out what they actually did to determine the at risk, because most of us were Black and brown students. There were maybe a couple of white kids, but pretty much for the most part, it was all Black and brown students. And we were put into, so Oak Park is a very big high school. My graduating class was like 780 some kids. And so it's a big campus, big school. And so for 4 by 100, they put all these 4 classes right in this one little hallway. And so instead of having to like maybe go from, one end of the school to the other end of the school to get to your math class, but in the 5-minute period, you're literally like right there and just kind of rotating between these 4 teachers and these 100, again, entering freshmen who have been identified as at risk. And so it was interesting for me. So I see the look on your face already. So it was interesting for me because, again, I have no idea how I got into that program. I struggled with math, but other than that, like I wasn't, in extremely, I didn't really struggle that much in school. I went to summer school for math 1 year. But other than that, I was a pretty average student. And again, I also didn't know that I was in it at the time. And so I remember like my first day, I was like, I go to my class and I'm like, well, this is weird. My next class is just right there. Huh. Okay. Well, guess I'll just stand here for a little bit and then go. And then it took me a little bit. And then finally, like, I don't remember if I asked someone or whatever, but just kind of found out that I was in this program. And I remember I went home and I was upset and talked to my mom about it. And, she was kind of like, well, I don't really know what it is either, but like it sounds like they're offering you more support, so that's fine. Honestly, I think that maybe, I still don't know the criteria, but it could have also been, Oak Park also kind of pays attention to like if your siblings went there and what their experience was. And I definitely know that when I entered that high school, I was treated very, very differently because of my brother's negative experience at that school. And that was something that I really had to deal with. Like my whole freshman year, I felt like teachers were just kind of like, what are you going to be like? What are you going to do? Like, are we going to have a problem with you? And then once they kind of got to know me and realized I was like, completely myself, it was a different experience kind of going forward. But I remember that as well. And so anyway, this program that I didn't know that I was in, the teachers were great. I actually really loved the 4 teachers that we had. They were wonderful, and we did some cool stuff and got to have these great opportunities. But at the same time, what also happened is that we were isolated from the rest of the school. And so then going into sophomore year, whereas everybody else has made broader connections throughout the school and like met other people. I remember, my best friend who I was, was not in the program. So she met more people, kind of got to know more people throughout the school. Meanwhile, like we're in this really, really tight group that isn't really giving us that experience and allowing us to kind of thrive fully. And so I remember thinking or feeling like it really hindered my experience. And also, again, it felt very unnecessary. And I also don't know that it was really helpful. They didn't keep the program going for very long. And I don't know anybody that, that like, I don't think it was this amazing benefit and that like stopped these, identified at-risk kids from, whatever the risk was. So but it was just interesting to me because again, it was like, whereas Oak Park was, again, a lot of white kids, decent amount of Black kids, and a few, everybody else. But like in 4 by 100, it was like 90%, like 95% Black and brown kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting with the show because I'm interested to see the effect it has, because the thing I noticed and the thing that makes it hard for me to kind of form opinions while I'm watching it, which I don't think is a bad thing, is that I think we're used to, especially on topics of race, kind of any media we consume about it is very preachy one way or the other, or is coming with a very hard perspective on how to fix the issue, or that there is no issue, or whatever it is, where this show is very much just following the kids and their experience. And yeah, we get the adult perspective, and there's definitely discussions of what the problem is and stuff like that, but there's really no broader discussion on like direct solutions based on what the kids are then experiencing. So it's just interesting because I don't think we've really seen anything like that, where it's literally just following these kids and their experience without there being kind of a very specific agenda behind it. Of course, there's an agenda with the documentary. If there wasn't, there wouldn't be a documentary. But It's not it doesn't seem in the same realm of what most documentaries do, at least not in the first 2 episodes.
Yeah, I will say it gets a little bit deeper.
Okay.
I don't think it gets preachy, but I do think that it gets deeper into a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that it's, shoved down your throat. And I think that it really is allowing the story to be told by following these students and also the teachers. I like that it goes home with some of the teachers and also goes home with the students, so you see their families and you get to really kind of understand how they grew up and if they went to Oak Park, what their experience was. So I really do like that. And it's another thing that I think is important about it, I guess I would say, is that it's showing, it's doing what I think a lot of things are doing right now that are making people uncomfortable, is that it's really seeking to expose the truth underneath, what we're trying to create, the illusion that we're trying to create. And so again, Oak Park is this kind of model suburb for integration. It was one of the cities, it is very, 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 very heavily racist for a very long time and segregated. And then there was an active decision to integrate Oak Park, and Percy Julian moved into Oak Park, which is another thing. So it's like exposing the truth beneath the illusion. So I went to Percy Julian Junior High School. I knew that Percy Julian was the first Black man to move into Oak Park and a little bit about him. What I didn't know is that when he arrived in Oak Park, his home was firebombed twice. So that's something that we weren't taught. I don't remember being taught how he was received when he came to the community and how he was treated by the white people that were there. They just kind of made it seem like, Black man moved in and everybody,
was happy.
Yay, we're so diverse, it's so great, yeah. And so that really stuck out to me watching this documentary and hearing that part of the history that, again, I wasn't really that aware of. And so I like that it's really exposing the truth beneath the surface. But what I know about Oak Park is that Oak Park is a very proud suburb. Oak Park loves itself and loves its diversity and loves these things about itself and its reputation and feels very, very tied to that. And so I can already see, even just with the first couple episodes that came out, how resistant people are to hearing these stories and to having these kind of conversations and to saying, well, is Oak Park really as, comfortable for everyone? Is it the same town for everyone to live in? Is everybody having the same experience? And even kind of challenging that and asking that question is making a whole lot of people uncomfortable, which is really great, because that's how we actually, work through and make those changes possible, is through the discomfort. And so I like that that's happening. But within the first week that the show came out, there's a group that a friend of mine from high school was in on Facebook called Growing Up in Oak Park. And it's been a group that she's been in for a while, and they banned people from talking about the show at all. Banned any discussion around the show. Even, I think it was even before the show came out. I don't even know if the first episode had come on yet, but we're just absolutely no discussions about this show in this group. And it's just kind of and I'm hearing that from other people in other places, that people are really getting shut down about talking about it. mostly white people, because again, it's challenging that illusion that things are really great and that this is a happy place for everyone, and it's really not. I have friends who in the summer would get stopped by the police, like just walking down the street, like black boy, 12 years old, like school's out, it's summer, where are you going? I'm a kid and I'm walking around my neighborhood, like, but constantly getting pulled over and just not even feeling comfortable to walk down their own streets. And again, this is in somewhere that's supposed to be this picture of, peaceful racial coexistence.
Right. Yeah, I think it's that the truth in the truth of it is the complexity, and I think the complexity is what makes everyone uncomfortable, including, on both sides of on all sides of the argument. It's because we naturally want to try to simplify things, and I think that's what you see a lot in the school from the administration, is them trying to implement these things that they think are going to help, but they're really oversimplifications to fix the problem, and therefore make the problem worse, or just maintain what's happening. And I think it's hard to really deal with those complexities, and it makes it hard in a school anyways, because there's a lot less adults than there are kids, and you get the whole thing of like, well, if we do, how do we make it equitable for everybody? Because if we do this one program, then that's giving these people an advantage, but not this. But then if we do this other program to help those people, now they have an advantage, and it just, it's very complicated and takes a lot of effort. I'm curious, I guess, from your perspective of going there, if you, like, what was your experience with the teachers and the administrators in trying to, I guess, fix the inequity? Did you feel like it was an active thing that was happening, or that it was just always kind of misguided?
I think there were a couple of teachers who really had a more mindful approach to trying to offer solutions. Actually, one of the teachers is in the documentary. He's amazing, Mr. Khan. He leads the spoken word group, and he's an English teacher, and he actually started that group the year that I graduated. And so, but coming from a place of creating spaces for expression, and for, again, creating spaces of safety and comfort and expression, were something that I think some of the teachers seem to have been able to do. There were a couple of teachers that tried some things while I was there that were moderately, successful and seemed helpful. But I think what most of the teachers did, and most of what I'm still seeing now, is that kind of idea of like, let me show you I can relate to you, and then that'll fix the problem. And so let me like code switch and talk to you in a different way, and hey girl you, and tell you I like your weave, and blah 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 blah, and that's going to fix the problem, rather than like, maybe I need to challenge my white students' perception. Maybe I need to, and challenge my own perception, because if this is how I think that I need to talk to you, to relate to you, then I'm already misguided. And that's, I think, a persistent problem, and I see it everywhere. That's one of the things that I experience in my life all the time. It literally, just happened today, and it's just kind of this interesting dynamic. But in a teaching, when you're a teacher and when you're in this role where you are, if you're aware that there's a problem, you also need to be aware of your own stuff. And I think that's what I see with a lot of these teachers, is they're not willing to turn the mirror onto themselves and say, okay, what are the views that I have? Like, what's my privilege? What's my race? Like, what are the conditioned racist responses into me? What am I doing? Because, this is a later episode that you haven't seen yet, but one of the teachers was like, I know that when I see black students in my class, I need to pay more attention to them. And I need to reach out to them and make sure that I let them know, like, I get you. And it's like, no, like, that's actually not what Black students need. And so I think it's still a persistent problem. And again, it's something that I saw before. Teachers would either, not pay any attention to it at all and not acknowledge that there was anything, or go kind of to the other end of the spectrum and be like, just almost uncomfortably, trying to be familiar in that way.
Yeah.
And I think I would err on the side of, like, don't do that. Like that I don't know. I get that that's people's own discomfort and kind of don't know what to do, but like that makes at least me personally feel way less seen than if somebody just treats me like I'm like not there at all, but like everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just so challenging because a school is really a mini government, and we see it. I mean, everything I'm seeing in the show is like, yeah, that's just how the system has been built for the country in a whole. And it's like, even if you are a teacher who is actually trying to create positive change, there's so many obstacles to it, because you have I was just thinking about, like, if a teacher was actively in a class challenging white students to kind of overcome racism, the outrage if, like, a student told the wrong parent about it and it went around social media and all this stuff. And just, I think it's hard if the administration isn't backing it, right? I mean, you see it in the government. You have your people, you have the activists fighting, and they're kind of on the fringe, who are dealing with all the crap until the government finally takes notice and does change. But really, most of that, the government officials aren't losing anything based on it. It's the activists on the ground actually trying to do things that are the ones making sacrifices.
Oh, well, right. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's the same in schools, and I think because it's not as grandeur, I think you see a lot, because I've talked to a lot of teachers who kind of say that, where they're like, I realize there's a problem, but there's really just nothing I can do, because every time I try to help, there's pushback either from the administration or from parents so you just kind of give up because of the pushback, and it's just not worth it. You're like, either you get to the point where it's like, well, I'm going to lose my job if I do something, and then I'm not useful, or, and I mean, that's a percentage, and then there's a lot of percentage of teachers who are just unaware.
Right.
So I think the mix makes it hard. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that it's hard, and you're on the ground kind of fighting that tough fight and challenging that. But I also think, like, as a teacher, that's kind of part of the responsibility that you take, is to kind of be an advocate in some ways for your students and for them to thrive. And I think there's a way to challenge racist perceptions and challenge your students without, like, creating a whole curriculum around, like, Black Lives Matter or something like that. I think that there's ways to, and one of the teachers actually does it really skillfully, and I don't remember her name. She's one of the teachers that they follow the most, the one who tried to actually create some change with the administration and did some research, and they, like, didn't even want to hear her presentation, but, like, still in her classroom, she talks about equity versus equality. She talks about she talked about it when Laquan McDonald was killed in Chicago, and she brought it up in class, and she talked to her students about it. And it's not like it doesn't seem like she's shoving it down people's throats, but at the same time she's educating them, and she's dispelling some of these ideas that, like, if you just work hard enough, then you're going to do well, and that's not everybody's experience. And she does it really artfully and skillfully, and it's a challenge. I don't think every teacher is really up to the challenge, and I think part of what I think needs to happen across the board in education is that, like, teachers need to continually grow, in order to continually meet the needs of the students that are presenting themselves. Because again, some of these teachers have been here since before I left, and they look great and they're still doing really well, but at the same time, like, are they evolving with the times that we live in? I mean, when I went to that school, students didn't have phones in their pocket. Like, I had a pager, and that was a big deal, but things are changing, and so the teachers need to be incentivized or supported in their own growth and in growing and challenging themselves and their own ideas. And so, but I also think giving up just creates, again, more of the problem. It's like, that's right. Because it's not an option to give up for these students. It's not an option to give up if this is your life, and that kind of, well, we'll just give up and I'll just keep collecting my salary and just watching, the Black students that I work with continually, not do well in the school, is kind of like that's, what I mean? Like, that doesn't sit well with me. And I think that, like, that's something that, again, people have to be willing to, like, turn that mirror on themselves and question, like, why am I doing this job? Am I effective in this job? What, what I mean? What am I doing here? Mm-hmm. And how can I try to be better? Because it's a big responsibility. I never wanted to be a teacher. I feel like that's a huge responsibility.
The thing I really love about the show is that it is forcing people to really analyze how they view the success of a school, because I think it's very counter to the way we as a culture or as a society kind of analyze the success of schools. Because on paper, that school is thriving and doing very well because there are students doing very well, getting really high grades, going to really big schools, and that's kind of what with test scores across the board, because they were showing kind of the disparity. And when they're presented to a normal person, you're just showing the numbers. You're not saying, well, these are the white numbers versus the black numbers versus the Asian numbers versus this. Mm-hmm. So on paper, for a lot of people, that school would look like it was an example of thriving. But then when you look at it deeper, you see all those little problems that without a documentary like this, you don't realize. You would just assume, like, well, kids are doing great there. It's a great school. It's diverse. They're doing well. There's all these resources available for them. Like, what's the problem? Because you don't take a deeper look. And I think it's also fights the kind of Hollywood narrative of what you often see of this struggling kind of black school where, like, a white teacher goes in and, like, saves everybody. And I mean, how many there's just so many of those movies. But I think that's kind of what we see it as. We see kind of school as, like, either the school is completely failing and needs, like, a savior, or it's fine. And there's just so much more complexity and nuance to it that I think this documentary is really showing.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Because it's just, it begs the question, like, how, like, people think good school success, right? But it's like, how do you fail at a really good school? How do kids continually slip through the cracks at what looks like a really good school with lots of resources? Like, what's happening? Yeah, that's I think one of the most interesting things about it, because it isn't that black and white. It's really kind of digging into the gray of, like, what does this look like? And on the surface, like you said, it's an incredible school, and there's tons of resources. And there was one of the episodes, they were in the jewelry making class, and, like, I took jewelry making class my senior year, and it was amazing. And, like, it's just, there were lots of resources, and yet, what's going on, and what are the challenges here?
Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting because I don't know why it seems, I mean, I'm sure other countries are like this, but I noticed it when I was living in Europe and kind of traveling a lot, is America has this, their idea of kind of our idea of kind of pride is that it's kind of this like, well, America's great and it's fine and it's the best and kind of this thing. And other countries don't really have that. I remember in the UK, there was just a lot of like, yeah, this is good, but how do we make it better? Like there was always this kind of analysis of how things can improve that I don't feel like we have here. I feel like most of the fight is on like, no, there's a problem. There's like, no, there's no problem. And there's not in like, well, there's always ways to improve what we're doing. We should constantly kind of be in it's the premise of mindfulness that there's always improvement and you're on a journey and you're always trying to just make things better. And I think this documentary kind of helps I think that's a reason it's making people feel very uncomfortable. But I think it's kind of putting us in a place where we're starting to realize that we can want things to be better and know that there are problems, and that doesn't mean that we hate the school or that we're against the school or the country or whatever it is. Those things aren't kind of mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I definitely think America's kind of identity as a whole has been very kind of more in the ego, right? More in kind of that ego space of like, yeah, like we're number one, it's good. And there's the defensiveness, right? If anybody challenges anything or brings up issues, then, there's that like resistance to hearing that. And so, yeah, I think that this is a very mindful approach to kind of looking at education. And I do think that, I'm excited to see what it's going to bring to Oak Park as a whole, as a community. I can already see that there's a lot more discussion. There's been, public forums and things to kind of have conversations about this. And so I'm really excited just to see what is going to change in the community for the better. As this show wraps up, it's going all the way. I think the last episode is like October 28th is the finale. So it's like halfway through the season. So if you haven't watched any of it, please check it out. It's really good.
Agreed. Wonderful. Do you have homework? I mean, just watch it, right?
Yeah, it's just to watch it and like, yeah, that's about it. Yeah, just watch it and go OPRF. It's so crazy. They do the same cheers and everything. I was like watching the episode and like, they do the moves. I was like, yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing. So that's all.
Yay. Okay, well, hopefully we'll not take another month off. My schedule's actually clearing up, so I should have much more time. As yours, I'm sure, is ramping up.
Fall ends up being my busy season, but we're still going to work it out. Either way, we'll see you guys soon.
Okay. Have a good one.